A sharp ringing cut through Detective Eliza Mercer's sleep. The digital clock on her nightstand glowed 3:17 a.m. as she fumbled for her phone. "Mercer," she mumbled, her voice still thick with sleep. "We've got a missing person," Captain Reeves said without preamble. "Rebecca Donovan, 28, museum curator. Disappeared 3 days ago. Family just reported it." Eliza pinched the bridge of her nose. 3 days is a long time. "That's why I'm calling you," Reeves replied. "The case has red flags all over it. Her apartment was pristine. Too pristine. Someone cleaned it. And there's something else. The last exhibition she curated was on Victorian morning rituals. Some of the artifacts are missing." "Send me the address," Eliza said, already reaching for her clothes. "I'll head over now." The November air bit at her skin as she stepped out of her car and approached the Victorian-era museum, a looming silhouette against the pre-dawn sky. The building had once been a wealthy industrialist's mansion before being converted into the Blackwood Historical Museum. Its Gothic architecture, with sharp spires and grotesque gargoyles, seemed to watch her with stone eyes. Inside, the museum director, Howard Pritchard, waited in the dim light of the lobby. He was a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses and nervous hands that couldn't stay still. "Detective Mercer," he greeted her, his voice echoing in the cavernous entrance. "I can't understand it. Rebecca was our most dedicated curator. She would never just leave." "Show me her office," Eliza requested, ignoring the director's rambling speculation. Rebecca's office was meticulously organized, folders arranged by color, pens lined up by size, sticky notes placed in perfect rows. Nothing like the creative chaos Eliza would expect from someone who worked with historical artifacts. Was she always this organized? Eliza asked. Pritchard hesitated. "No, actually, Rebecca was notorious for her creative mess. This isn't normal." Eliza nodded, her suspicions confirmed. She examined the desk and noticed a small leather-bound journal partially hidden under a stack of folders. Opening it, she found pages of Rebecca's handwriting detailing the Victorian morning exhibition, followed by several pages that had been torn out. What was in the missing exhibition? Eliza asked. Victorian death photography, morning jewelry made with human hair, memorial sculptures. Pritchard listed, tapping his fingers against his leg. And the centerpiece, a rare memento mori collection belonging to the Hargrove family. Who are the Hargroves? One of the city's founding families. They donated the items 6 months ago after the death of Eleanor Hargrove, the last direct descendant. The collection was worth a small fortune, not just monetarily but historically. Eliza made notes in her small black notebook. "I'll need to speak with whoever handled the donation." "That would be Vincent Hargrove, Eleanor's nephew," Pritchard replied. "He's the executor of the estate." Vincent Hargrove's estate sat on the outskirts of the city, a sprawling property surrounded by ancient oak trees. The house itself was a modern construction, all glass and sharp angles, incongruous with the old money name. The man who opened the door didn't match Eliza's expectations either. Vincent Hargrove looked to be in his mid-30s, with dark hair and intense gray eyes that seemed to assess her in one sweeping glance. He wore a simple black sweater and jeans rather than the stuffy attire she'd anticipated. "Detective Mercer," he said with a slight nod. "I've been expecting your visit. Please come in." The interior of the house was minimalist, almost austere, with the exception of a wall devoted to black and white photographs, faces from different eras staring out from ornate frames. "Family history?" Eliza asked, nodding toward the photos. "In a manner of speaking," Vincent replied. "I collect photographs, particularly those that tell stories, capture moments of transition." Something in his tone made the hairs on the back of Eliza's neck stand up. She pushed the feeling aside and focused on the case. "Mr. Hargrove, I'm investigating the disappearance of Rebecca Donovan." The flicker of something, concern perhaps, crossed his face. "The curator?" "Yes, I heard." "Tragedy. We had several meetings about my aunt's collection." "When did you last see her?" "About a week ago," Vincent answered smoothly. "She came here to discuss additional items I found in my aunt's attic. Rebecca was particularly interested in a set of mourning jewelry that contained hair from various family members." "Did she seem troubled? Afraid of anything?" Vincent considered this, his gray eyes never leaving Eliza's face. "She was passionate about her work, intensely so. But troubled? No, I wouldn't say that. Although what? She did ask some unusual questions about my family's history, specifically about deaths that seemed unexplained." Eliza wrote this down, feeling Vincent's eyes on her. "What kind of unexplained deaths?" "My family has a rather macabre history, detective. Suicides, accidents, disappearances. Rebecca seemed to think there was a pattern. I attributed it to her researcher's curiosity." "And was there? A pattern?" Vincent smiled, a curve of his lips that didn't reach his eyes. "Isn't that what you're here to determine, Detective Mercer?" As Eliza left the Hargrove estate, she couldn't shake the feeling that Vincent knew more than he was saying. Something about him unsettled her, the intensity of his gaze, the careful way he chose his words. But she also couldn't deny a flutter of interest, a dangerous curiosity about the man with the wall of forgotten faces. Over the next week, Eliza immersed herself in Rebecca Donovan's life. The young curator had lived alone in a small apartment filled with books on death rituals across cultures. Her phone records showed multiple calls to and from the museum and Vincent Hargrove in the days before her disappearance. The last person to see Rebecca was her colleague, Dr. Meera Patel, who worked on the exhibition with her. She was excited about something she'd discovered, Meera told Eliza as they sat in the museum's dimly lit cafe. Something about the Hargrove collection. She said it could change our understanding of the family's history. "Did she mention what it was specifically?" Meera shook her head. Rebecca could be secretive when she was onto something big, but she did mention a hidden compartment in one of the mourning lockets, said there was a message inside that connected to other deaths. Eliza nodded, thinking about the torn pages in Rebecca's journal. Would Rebecca have taken artifacts from the museum? Meera looked offended. Absolutely not. Rebecca was obsessive about preservation protocols. If anything, she would have documented everything meticulously before even touching an artifact. Later that day, Eliza returned to the museum to examine the Victorian mourning exhibition. Most of the items were still on display: the death photography, the hair art, the memento mori sculptures. But according to the catalog, 3 items were indeed missing: a mourning locket containing a lock of dark hair, a small silver box with an inscription, and a diary belonging to Eliza Hargrove, dated 1867. As she studied the remaining artifacts, Eliza felt someone watching her. She turned to find Vincent Hargrove standing a few feet away, his hands in the pockets of his dark coat. "Fascinating, isn't it?" he said, nodding toward a post-mortem photograph of a young woman. The Victorian obsession with preserving the memory of the dead. "Mr. Hargrove, I didn't expect to see you here. I donate to the museum regularly, and given the circumstances, I thought I should check on my family's collection." His eyes met hers. "Have you made any progress finding Miss Donovan?" "That's not something I can discuss," Eliza replied professionally. Vincent smiled that same unsettling smile. "Of course. Forgive my curiosity." He paused, studying her face. "You know, Detective, you remind me of someone in my family's history. There's a photograph of her in my collection. Eliza Hargrove, my great-great-grandfather's first wife." Eliza raised an eyebrow. We share a name? And a remarkable resemblance. Perhaps you'd like to see the photograph sometime? It might provide insight into the artifacts Rebecca was so interested in. Every instinct told Eliza to maintain professional distance, but her curiosity was piqued. Perhaps for the investigation. Vincent handed her his card. Call me anytime, detective, day or night. After he left, Eliza examined the card. It was plain white with just his name and number in elegant black type. She slipped it into her pocket, telling herself it was just another lead to follow. That night, Eliza dreamed of Victorian morning clothes and silver lockets containing locks of hair. In the dream, she opened a locket to find her own hair inside, and when she looked up, Vincent Hargrove was watching her with those penetrating gray eyes. She woke with a start, her heart racing. The digital clock read 3:17 a.m., the same time she'd received the call about Rebecca's disappearance. On impulse, she reached for Rebecca's journal, which she'd brought home from the office. Using a soft pencil, she lightly shaded the blank page after the torn sections, revealing indentations from Rebecca's writing. Slowly, words emerged. The Hargrove cycle repeats. Every 40 years. Always a woman. Always someone who resembles Eliza. And below that, a list of names and dates, going back to 1867. The last name on the list was Rebecca Donovan, with yesterday's date. Eliza's blood ran cold. According to Rebecca's notes, she should have already been dead. The next morning, Eliza drove to the city archives. If Rebecca had been researching the Hargrove family history, this would be the place to start. Hours later, surrounded by old newspapers and records, Eliza had confirmed a disturbing pattern. Every 40 years, a woman connected to the Hargrove family had died under mysterious circumstances. 1867. Eliza Hargrove, 27, first wife of Thomas Hargrove, found drowned in the lake on the family property. 1907. Marie Dubois, 26, fiancée of William Hargrove, disappeared 2 weeks before their wedding. 1947. Catherine Bennett, 29, researcher studying the Hargrove family history, apparent suicide. 1987. Diana Hargrove, 28, distant cousin, died in a house fire that destroyed all family records she had been collecting. Each woman had been involved in researching or preserving the family's history. Each had been reported as having dark hair and light eyes, similar to Eliza's own appearance. And each death had been investigated by a different detective, none of whom had connected the cases. Until Rebecca had started to unravel the pattern. Eliza's phone rang, startling her. Vincent Hargrove's name appeared on the screen. Detective Mercer, his smooth voice came through the line. I found something in my aunt's belongings that I think might interest you. Another mourning locket, not part of the museum donation. It contains a note written by my ancestor, Eliza Hargrove. Eliza's heart raced. I'll be there in 30 minutes. As she drove to the Hargrove estate, storm clouds gathered overhead. By the time she arrived, rain was falling in heavy sheets, drumming against the roof of her car. The modern house looked eerily beautiful in the storm, rain streaming down its glass walls like tears. Vincent opened the door before she could knock, as if he'd been waiting for her. He wore the same black sweater as before, a stark contrast to his pale skin. You've been busy, he said, noting the folder of research she carried. Please, come in out of the rain. Eliza stepped inside, her clothes damp from the short dash from her car. The house was dimly lit, with only a few lamps casting soft golden light against the darkening afternoon. Would you like some tea? To warm up? Vincent offered. No, thank you. I'd like to see the locket you mentioned. He nodded and led her to his study, a room lined with bookshelves and dominated by an antique desk. On the desk sat a small silver box. I found this hidden in a secret compartment in my aunt's writing desk, Vincent explained, opening the box to reveal a silver locket on a delicate chain. It's been passed down through the women in my family for generations. The locket was ornate, decorated with intricate engravings of flowers and vines. Vincent carefully opened it to reveal a lock of dark hair, almost identical to Eliza's own, and a tiny folded piece of paper. "I haven't read it," he said. "I thought perhaps it should be part of the official investigation." Eliza hesitated, then carefully unfolded the yellowed paper. The handwriting was faded but legible. "My dearest Thomas, by the time you read this, I will be gone. I have discovered the truth about your family's covenant with darkness. The price paid for your fortune and longevity. A bride sacrificed every 40 years, her life force feeding the shadows that sustain you. I will not be your sacrifice. If I must die, it will be by my own hand, not yours. May God have mercy on your soul, for I cannot." Eliza Hargrove, 1867. Eliza looked up from the note to find Vincent watching her with an unreadable expression. "Did you know about this?" she asked, her voice steady despite the chill running down her spine. "My family has many legends," Vincent replied. "Most of them are just that, stories created to explain tragedy or coincidence." "This doesn't sound like a legend," Eliza said, holding up the note. "This sounds like a woman who feared for her life." Lightning flashed outside, briefly illuminating the room in stark white light. In that instant, Eliza noticed something on Vincent's desk: photographs of Rebecca Donovan. Not crime scene photos, but surveillance pictures. Rebecca entering her apartment, Rebecca at the museum, Rebecca meeting Vincent for coffee. The implications hit her like a physical blow. "You were watching her," Eliza said, her hand instinctively moving toward her concealed weapon. "Why?" Vincent didn't deny it. "I was protecting my family's legacy. Rebecca was getting too close to secrets that should remain buried." "Where is she, Vincent?" His gray eyes met hers, and for the first time, Eliza saw something ancient and cold behind them. "Gone, like all the others." "But you already suspected that, didn't you, detective? That's why you're here alone, without backup. Because part of you wanted to believe there was another explanation." Another flash of lightning, followed immediately by a deafening crack of thunder. The power flickered, then went out completely, plunging the room into darkness. When the emergency lights came on a moment later, Vincent was standing much closer, the locket dangling from his fingers. "You look so much like her," he whispered. "My ancestor's first wife, Eliza. It's why I was drawn to you from the moment we met." "Stay back," Eliza warned, drawing her gun. "Vincent Hargrove, you're under arrest for the suspected murder of Rebecca Donovan." "Murder is such an ugly word," Vincent said, seeming unconcerned by the weapon pointed at him. "I prefer to think of it as tribute, a necessary exchange. Put the locket down and place your hands behind your head." Instead, Vincent took a step closer. "You feel it too, don't you? The connection between us. It's not coincidence that brought you to this case, Eliza. It's fate. The same fate that has bound our families for over 150 years. "There is no fate," Eliza said firmly. "Only choices. And right now, you're choosing to be arrested peacefully or by force." Vincent smiled, that same smile that didn't reach his eyes. "There's a third option." He lifted the locket. "Join me. Become part of the legacy willingly, and I won't need to take another life for 40 years. Where is Rebecca's body? Where all the others are. In the foundations of the original family home. Their sacrifice ensures the prosperity of future generations. One life every 40 years, to feed the darkness that gives us power." Eliza's mind raced. The original Hargrove home would be the old mansion, now the Blackwood Museum. You buried her in the museum. Not me personally. The darkness takes what is offered. But yes, her essence now resides in the walls of my family's first home. Vincent took another step forward. You have a choice, Eliza. Join me willingly, or join Rebecca unwillingly. Either way, the cycle will continue. Eliza fired a warning shot past Vincent's shoulder. Stay back. But as the sound echoed through the room, something impossible happened. The bullet seemed to slow, then stop in midair, hanging suspended for a moment before dropping harmlessly to the floor. Vincent's smile widened. You see? The power is real. And it could be yours too. For the first time in her career, Eliza felt true fear. Not just for her life, but for her soul. Because despite everything, despite knowing what Vincent had done, she still felt drawn to him, a pull that defied logic or morality. What are you? She whispered. A custodian of ancient power, Vincent replied. My ancestor made a pact with forces beyond understanding. Wealth, influence, longevity, all in exchange for the sacrifice of a kindred soul every 40 years. Always a woman who bears the essence of the first sacrifice. Always someone drawn to our family's history. Outside, the storm raged, lightning illuminating the room in staccato bursts. In those flashes, Eliza thought she saw shadows moving independently of their sources, elongating, stretching toward her. She fired again, this time aiming directly at Vincent. Again, the bullet stopped before reaching him, as if hitting an invisible barrier. Your weapons can't hurt me, Vincent said softly. Not here, not now, during the convergence. The time when the veil between worlds is thinnest. Eliza backed away, her mind struggling to process what she was seeing. This isn't possible. And yet, you see it with your own eyes. Vincent held out his hand, the locket dangling from his fingers. Take it. Accept your destiny. For a moment, a terrible, inexplicable moment, Eliza felt her hand reaching toward the locket, drawn by something beyond her control. A part of her wanted to take it, to surrender to the darkness that Vincent offered. But then she thought of Rebecca, of all the women who had died to feed this twisted legacy, of justice denied for over a century. With every ounce of willpower, she pulled her hand back. No. Vincent's expression hardened. Then you leave me no choice. The shadows in the room seemed to thicken, coalescing into tendrils that reached for Eliza. She backed away, bumping into the wall of photographs. As her shoulder pressed against the frames, an idea struck her. The covenant, the sacrifice, it was all tied to the family's history, to the faces watching from these photographs. In one desperate move, Eliza grabbed the nearest frame and smashed it against the desk, shattering the glass. She seized the photograph inside, a portrait of Thomas Hargrove, the man who had allegedly made the original pact. Stop! Vincent shouted, real fear in his voice for the first time. Eliza held the photograph over the open flame of a decorative candle on Vincent's desk. Call them off or your ancestor burns. The shadows hesitated, hovering in the air between them. You don't understand what you're doing, Vincent said urgently. Those photographs are conduits. Destroying them could release what's bound within. Then let's find out, Eliza challenged, the corner of the photograph beginning to blacken in the flame. Vincent lunged for her, but too late. The photograph caught fire, flames racing across the aged paper. A howl filled the room, not from Vincent, but from everywhere and nowhere at once. The shadows convulsed, twisting in on themselves like living smoke. Vincent fell to his knees, his face contorted in pain. What have you done? He gasped. The burning photograph crumbled to ash in Eliza's hand. Around them, the other photographs began to tremble in their frames, the glass cracking as if under immense pressure. "One sacrifice every 40 years, Eliza said, understanding dawning. "But not to continue the pact, to maintain it, to keep whatever power your ancestor bargained with contained." Vincent looked up at her, his gray eyes filled with a mixture of rage and desperation. "You've doomed us all." The museum was eerily quiet as Eliza led the forensic team through its darkened halls 3 days later. Vincent Hargrove was in custody, charged with the murder of Rebecca Donovan, though he had yet to reveal where her body was hidden. After that night at the Hargrove estate, things had returned to normal, or what passed for normal. The shadows had receded, the strange phenomena had stopped. Eliza had convinced herself that what she'd witnessed was some kind of elaborate trick, a psychological manipulation designed to frighten her. Except for the bullet they'd found on the floor of Vincent's study. The bullet that had never struck anything, yet had stopped in midair. Detective Mercer, one of the technicians, called from the basement. "You need to see this." Eliza descended the narrow stairs to the museum's foundation, the original structure of the Hargrove mansion from the 1800s. The technician pointed to a section of wall where the ground-penetrating radar had detected an anomaly. "There's a space behind this wall," he explained, "and something solid inside it." Eliza nodded. "Open it up." Hours later, as they broke through the brick and mortar, Eliza steeled herself for what they might find. But nothing could have prepared her for the reality. Behind the wall was a small chamber, and within it, 5 perfectly preserved bodies. Women from different eras, their clothes and appearances matching the historical records Eliza had uncovered. Eliza Hargrove from 1867, Marie Dubois from 1907, Catherine Bennett from 1947, Diana Hargrove from 1987, and Rebecca Donovan, still in the clothes she'd been wearing when she disappeared. But what made Eliza's blood run cold wasn't just the preservation of the bodies, it was their expressions. Each woman's face was frozen in a look of terrible understanding, their eyes wide open, their mouths contorted in silent screams. As the bodies were carefully removed for forensic examination, Eliza noticed something clutched in Rebecca's hand, the missing diary of Eliza Hargrove. With gloved hands, she carefully extracted the book and opened it to the last entry. November 15, 1867. "I have discovered the truth of the Hargrove legacy. It was not Thomas who made the pact with darkness, but his father, Jonathan. And the price was not wealth or power, but protection. Protection from something ancient that slumbers beneath this land. The first sacrifice was not willing. It was Jonathan's young wife, my namesake, the first Eliza. She discovered his plans and tried to escape, but he caught her and walled her up alive in the foundation of this house. But her death did not complete the ritual as Jonathan intended. Instead of binding the darkness, it created a cycle, a hungry pattern that demands a new sacrifice every 40 years. Always a woman who bears the essence of the first victim, always someone who comes too close to the truth. I am to be the next sacrifice. Thomas claims he loves me, but I have seen the coldness in his eyes. He is his father's son, willing to protect the family legacy at any cost. If anyone finds this diary, know that the Hargroves do not sacrifice to gain power, they sacrifice to contain what they unleashed. And if the cycle is broken, what lies beneath will awaken. God help us all if that happens." Eliza closed the diary, her hands trembling. Vincent's words echoed in her mind, "You've doomed us all." Outside, the ground beneath the museum trembled slightly, so faintly that only Eliza seemed to notice. A hairline crack appeared in the foundation wall, spreading like a spiderweb, and from deep below, something stirred. The interrogation room was cold and sterile, the fluorescent lights harsh on Vincent's pale face. He sat calmly, his hands folded on the table, as if he were hosting a business meeting rather than facing multiple murder charges. "You've read the diary," he said as Eliza entered the room. Not a question, but a statement. Yes. Eliza placed a folder on the table and sat across from him. 5 bodies, Vincent. 5 women murdered to maintain your family's covenant. Not murdered, Vincent corrected. Sacrificed. There's a difference. Not to the law. Vincent leaned forward. The law is irrelevant now. You've broken the cycle, detective. The covenant is unraveling. Surely you felt it, the tremors, the cracks appearing in the foundation. Eliza had felt them, growing stronger each day since they'd opened the chamber. Small earthquakes that scientists couldn't explain, centered on the museum grounds. What exactly did your ancestor unleash? She asked. Something old. Something that was here long before humans built their cities. Vincent's gray eyes held hers. My ancestor didn't make a deal with the devil, detective. He made a deal with something far older and more hungry. The native people who lived here before called it the devourer of light. My ancestor found it while digging the foundation for his new home. And the sacrifices? Contained it, fed it just enough to keep it dormant. Vincent's expression was grim. But now that you've broken the cycle and released the previous sacrifices, there's nothing holding it back. Eliza struggled to maintain her professional detachment. You expect me to believe this? I expect you to remember what you saw in my home. The shadows, the bullet that couldn't touch me. Vincent leaned closer. There are forces in this world that science can't explain, detective. And one of them is about to devour this city because you were too righteous to let the cycle continue. Even if I believed you, which I don't, I couldn't let you keep killing women. 1 woman every 40 years, Vincent countered. Against an entire city. The mathematics of morality seems clear to me. Before Eliza could respond, the building shook violently. Lights flickered and plaster dust rained from the ceiling. It's beginning, Vincent said softly. The devourer is waking. Eliza steadied herself against the table. What can stop it? Vincent's eyes met hers, and in them she saw not triumph, but resignation. The same thing that contained it before. A willing sacrifice. Someone with the essence of the first Eliza. Understanding dawned, cold and heavy in Eliza's stomach. Someone like me. Vincent nodded slowly. The resemblance is more than physical, detective. Your spirit, your determination, your willingness to seek truth at any cost. You are her in every way that matters. Another tremor shook the building, stronger this time. From outside, Eliza heard car alarms and distant screams. Why should I believe you? She demanded. This could all be an elaborate lie to escape justice. Because deep down, you know it's true, Vincent replied. You felt the connection from the moment we met. Not just to me, but to all of this, to the history, to the darkness. It called to you just as it called to all the others. And the worst part was Eliza did know. She had felt it, the inexplicable pull toward Vincent, toward the Hargrove legacy, toward the darkness that seemed to hover at the edges of her consciousness since taking this case. If I were to do this, she said carefully, to offer myself willingly, how would it work? The original ceremony took place at the heart of what is now the museum, Vincent explained, where the devourer first emerged. With the covenant broken, only blood freely given can establish a new binding. Eliza stood, decision made. I'm taking you to the museum. If what you say is true, you'll show me exactly how to contain this thing. And if you're lying, if this is some kind of trick, you'll spend the rest of your life in prison. Vincent's face remained impassive, but something like respect flickered in his eyes. As you wish, detective. The museum was in chaos when they arrived, the building seemingly tearing itself apart from within. Massive cracks ran through the walls and floors, and a strange darkness seemed to pool in the corners, thicker than shadow. Eliza led Vincent, hands cuffed, through the emergency exit and down to the foundation level. The forensic teams were long gone, evacuated when the tremors began to threaten the building's stability. "Here," Vincent said, stopping before the chamber where the bodies had been found. The opening they'd made had widened, the bricks crumbling away to reveal the empty space beyond. "Uncuff me," Vincent requested. "I need to prepare the ritual." Eliza hesitated, then complied, her gun ready at her side. "Don't try anything." Vincent rubbed his wrists, then approached the chamber. "The altar was here," he said, pointing to a section of floor. "Beneath it is where the devourer first emerged." As if responding to his words, the floor cracked, a spider web of fractures spreading from where he pointed. The darkness in the corners of the room began to move, flowing like liquid toward the growing fissure. "We don't have much time," Vincent warned, his voice tight. "The devourer is rising." Eliza watched as he knelt and began tracing symbols on the floor using a piece of chalk he'd taken from his pocket. Despite her skepticism, she felt a chill as the markings seemed to glow faintly in the dim light. "Why are you doing this?" she asked suddenly. "If I sacrifice myself, the cycle ends. Your family loses its protection." Vincent paused, not looking up from his work. "Because some burdens are too heavy to bear, detective. I've watched 5 women die to maintain my family's covenant. I've been both jailer and supplicant to a horror beyond understanding. Perhaps it's time for it all to end, one way or another." For the first time, Eliza saw Vincent not as a monster, but as a man trapped by a legacy he never chose, a custodian of darkness passed down through generations. The building shook again, more violently this time. From the crack in the floor, a tendril of pure darkness emerged, not the absence of light, but something that seemed to consume light itself. "It's time," Vincent said, standing. "The binding requires blood freely given at the moment of the devourer's emergence." Eliza stared at the writhing darkness, her heart pounding. "And if I do this, if I give myself, it goes back to sleep for another 40 years? Vincent's eyes met hers, and for once, they held no calculation or coldness, only a terrible sadness. "No, detective. A willing sacrifice doesn't continue the cycle. It ends it permanently. You're asking me to die. I'm telling you the truth as you asked for it." Vincent held out his hand. "The choice is yours. Your life or countless others." Another violent tremor. The crack widened, more tendrils of darkness emerging, reaching toward them with hungry purpose. Eliza looked at Vincent's outstretched hand, then at the growing darkness. Justice or sacrifice? It had always come down to this choice, from the moment she'd taken this case, perhaps from the moment she was born with the face of a woman dead for over 150 years. "No tricks," she said, taking Vincent's hand. "No covenant. This ends today." Vincent nodded, something like respect in his eyes. "Stand at the edge of the fissure. When the devourer reaches for you, you must step forward willingly. Only a sacrifice freely given can bind it." As Eliza approached the crack, the darkness surged upward, forming a swirling column of void. Within it, she thought she glimpsed faces: Rebecca, Diana, Catherine, Marie, the first Eliza, all watching her with solemn eyes. "I'm sorry I couldn't save you," she whispered to them. The darkness reached for her, tendrils curling around her ankles like smoke. Eliza closed her eyes, preparing for the final step forward. But then she felt strong arms around her, pulling her back. Her eyes flew open to see Vincent launching himself into the void. "Vincent, no." His face turned toward her one last time, and she saw in it not resignation, but resolution. "My family created this burden," he said. "It's fitting that the last of us should end it." Before Eliza could respond, Vincent stepped fully into the darkness. The void seemed to contract violently, pulling inward like a star collapsing. Vincent's body arched in apparent agony, his mouth open in a silent scream as the darkness consumed him. For a moment, everything was stillness and silence. Then, with a sound like the world tearing, the darkness imploded, taking Vincent with it. The fissure slammed closed with such force that Eliza was thrown backward against the wall. When she regained her senses, the chamber was still. The cracks in the floor had sealed themselves, leaving only faint lines like ancient scars. The oppressive feeling, the sense of something vast and hungry lurking below, was gone. In the center of the room, where Vincent had disappeared, lay a single item: the silver locket, its chain broken, its surface tarnished as if it had aged centuries in moments.